Most leaders don't think of themselves as controlling. They think of themselves as responsible. They care about the work, they care about the mission, they care about the people involved. So when something feels off, they step in. They review one more draft, they ask one more question, they stay involved a little longer than planned. After all, the stakes are real. Deadlines matter, mistakes are visible, and letting go doesn't feel neutral. It feels risky. What most leaders don't realize is that control rarely starts as control. It starts as concern. Concern about quality, concern about outcome, concern about what happens if things go wrong. So leaders tighten their grip without meaning to. Not because they don't trust their team, but because they don't trust the situation. And over time, that changes the relationship. Creatives start looking for permission instead of direction, decisions get smaller, and ownership gets thinner. Everything still functions, but something important shifts. Now listen, this video isn't about telling leaders to stop caring. It's about understanding why letting go feels so hard in the first place. Because until you understand what's underneath control, you'll keep defaulting to it, even when you don't want to. Control rarely starts with a desire to dominate. It usually starts with fear. Not obvious fear, but quiet fear. Fear of things slipping, fear of being surprised, fear of something important falling on your watch. Most leaders feel this before they can name it. A deadline feels tighter than it used to, feedback from above feels heavier, and the margin for error feels thinner. So the instinct kicks in. Stay closer, check more often, make sure nothing goes wrong. And control becomes a way to manage uncertainty. And what makes this tricky is that the fear doesn't feel emotional. It feels practical. It sounds like responsibility. It looks like diligence. It passes every internal leadership test. But underneath it is usually one question leaders don't say out loud. What happens if I let go and this fails? That question carries weight, especially for leaders who feel accountable for outcomes, reputations, or people's trust. So instead of naming the fear, control becomes the solution. Not because leaders don't trust their team, but because they don't trust the environment. The pressure, the expectations, the cost of mistakes. And when fear stays unnamed, it leaks into behavior. Decisions get pulled upward, autonomy narrows, creatives feel the room tighten before anything is said. Control feels like safety to the leader, but it often feels like distance to the team. And that gap quietly reshapes how people show up long before anyone talks about trust. Control doesn't usually show up as micromanagement. It shows up as subtle shifts. A decision that used to live with the team now gets escalated. A question that didn't need approval suddenly does, and a draft that felt finished now just feels like this looming question mark. And nothing dramatic changes, but behavior does. Creatives start scanning for cues, they listen more closely to tone, they wait longer before moving forward. And not because they were told to, but because they're trying to avoid missteps. And over time, this changes how people think. Instead of asking, what's the best solution, they ask, what's the safest option? And instead of trusting instinct, they hedge. Instead of experimenting, they optimize. The work becomes tighter, cleaner, less surprising. From a leadership perspective, this can look like improvement. Fewer mistakes, more alignment, less pushback. But something important is being traded away. Ownership. When people stop owning decisions, they stop carrying the work as theirs. When they stop carrying the work as theirs, energy drops. They still care, they still try, but they hold back because creative confidence requires room. Room to decide, room to be wrong, room to learn in public. Control shrinks that room, and the cost isn't just creativity, it's trust. Not because leaders are untrustworthy, but because the system no longer signals trust. People adjust to the system they're in. And when the system rewards caution, caution becomes the culture. That's how control reshapes teams. Quietly, gradually, without anyone intending it. Most leaders know, at least intellectually, that control isn't ideal. They've read about empowerment, they've talked about trust, they've said they want ownership on their teams, and yet letting go still feels deeply uncomfortable. And that's because control isn't just about work, it's about identity. For many leaders, their value has been reinforced through competence. They're good at seeing problems early. They're good at making calls under pressure. They're good at fixing things. So stepping back doesn't feel neutral. It feels like disappearing. If I'm not weighing in, am I still adding value? If I'm not catching issues, am I still doing my job? If something goes wrong, will it come back to me? And those questions sit underneath a lot of control, especially in environments where outcomes are visible and mistakes are costly. Letting go means accepting uncertainty, and it means allowing things to unfold without full oversight. It means trusting people in moments where you can't intervene, and that's not easy. So, leaders compromise. They say they trust the team, but they stay close just in case. They give autonomy, but keep veto power nearby. They step back, but not too far. From the leader's side, this feels balanced, but from the team side, it's unclear. Am I trusted or not? Is this mine or temporary? Do I decide or do I wait? That ambiguity is exhausting, not because people need constant freedom, but because they need to know where they stand. Letting go isn't hard because leaders don't care. It's hard because it asks leaders to loosen their grip on certainty. And certainty can feel safer than trust, even when it quietly costs more in the long run. Here's what I've learned. When leaders begin to loosen control, the first thing they usually notice is discomfort. Not relief, not freedom, but discomfort. Decisions take longer, outcomes look less predictable, the work doesn't always land the way they would have done it. That's the moment many leaders step back in, not because the team failed, but because uncertainty feels expensive. What often gets missed is what's happening beneath the surface. When control loosens, people start recalibrating. They test their footing, they check where the edges are, they ask quieter questions internally before speaking out loud. And this doesn't mean things are getting worse. It means responsibility is redistributing. Ownership doesn't appear instantly. It grows. When leaders resist the urge to step back in too quickly, something begins to shift. People stop asking for permission. They start bringing decisions. They take responsibility, not just for execution, but for outcomes. The work might look messier for a while, but the energy changes. People stand a little taller in meetings. They defend ideas with more confidence. They feel the weight of decisions in a way that's motivating, not draining. And control often feels efficient. Ownership, though, feels slower. But ownership compounds. It builds judgment. It builds confidence. It builds trust that doesn't need constant reinforcement. Look, leaders don't lose influence when they loosen control. They change the kind of influence they have. From directing every move to shaping the environment decisions are made in. That shift is subtle, but it's often the difference between a team that complies and a team that actually carries the work as their own. I want to be honest about something. I didn't do this consistently. There were projects where I loosened control, where I stepped back, where I trusted the team more fully, and there were projects where I didn't. Looking back, the pattern is obvious. The projects I trusted the most were the ones being scrutinized less by leaders above me. The ones with lower visibility, the ones with lower stakes, more margin for mistakes. When pressure from above increased, my grip tightened. Not because I stopped believing in my team, but because the cost of getting it wrong felt higher. That's where this gets real. Control isn't just about how much you trust your team. It's about how safe you feel. When leaders feel exposed, they default to what feels reliable. Their own judgment, their own instincts, their own involvement. And I didn't realize how clearly that shift was felt by the people I was leading. What changed for me wasn't perfection, it was awareness. I started noticing when my control was driven by fear instead of clarity, when I was staying involved to manage anxiety, not to add value, and even small changes mattered. Naming which decisions were truly mine, naming which ones weren't, being honest about pressure instead of hiding it. So if you feel the pull toward control, sit with these questions this week. Where do I lead with trust only when it feels safe? Where does pressure above me change how I lead below me? What would clarity look like here instead of control? Letting go doesn't mean stepping away. It means refusing to pass anxiety downstream. And that's the work most leaders never stop learning how to do.